Good afternoon, everyone. I call Committee of Supply Section C to order. We're meeting today to continue consideration of the estimates of the Ministry of Public Safety. I now recognize the Minister to move the vote.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $849,613,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General Ministry operations.
Thank you, Minister. I now recognize the member for Prince George Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll probably spend our limited time here on ICBC related issues. I may have a couple more questions coming in from colleagues pertaining to other areas, but can I submit them by okay, great. So ICBC has entered the world of no-fault insurance with the enhanced care model commencing last month. And most of the savings anticipated by government was money saved from litigation. However, the BC Supreme Court has ruled that victims can still hire lawyers to represent their claims in court. I know the attorney is challenging that decision, but in the meantime, until it's heard, how many claims does the minister anticipate could be challenged in court and at what costs? How many claims does the minister anticipate could be challenged in court and at what costs?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So in terms of the actual number of cases, that I don't have the ability to give that number, but I can tell you that IC has booked up to $390 million to resolve if they lose that case. That's what they have booked, up to that.
does this situation increase the insurance risk as determined under Chapter 4 of the minimum capital test guideline should the appeal be dismissed?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The answer is no.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So until the outcome of the appeal is determined, is ICBC advising claimants that they are still entitled to hire a lawyer to represent their case?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. In terms of legal advice, that is up to the customer. That was up to the customer before the 1st of May, and it is the same after the 1st of May.
Member.
So, judging by the minister's answer, I would, so a claimant now has the choice in pursuing a court remedy versus the online tribunal method?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So, what the decision in effect said, and I thank the member for the question, is so between April 1st, 2019 and May 1st, 2021, the customer has the ability under the current decision of the lower court to go lawyer route or civil resolution tribunal route.
Member.
And if a claimant has gone by way of the civil resolution tribunal route, can they change their mind and pursue litigation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So if the claim was between those two dates that I said, April 1st to April 1st, 2019 and May 1st, 2021, yes, they can.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And after that date in 2020 or 2021, then what is the process?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So after the 1st of May this year, there is no more right of tort, except in very limited circumstances.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So isn't that what the Supreme Court of British Columbia decision referenced, that that litigants still had, or that claimants still had the ability to litigate or to pursue the help of a lawyer to take that process through court? And that's what the appeal is about right now?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So the court case dealt with a very specific period between the April 1st, 2019 and May 1st, 2021. And then after May 1st, the legislation is in place. The tort system's been removed. That period that is under litigation, that's the period in which someone can decide, okay, I want to you know, go the tort route, or I can go the civil resolution tribunal route, and they have the ability to change. They have the ability to change their mind if they've gone the civil resolution route to go tort. After the 1st of May, it is no longer tort, it is the civil resolution tribunal.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess perhaps I didn't, you know, when I read the decision, maybe I wasn't in the right frame of mind when I read that. It was my estimation, you know, speaking in broad terms, that even under the current tort legislation that commenced in May, that people are still have the right to pursue a court solution to whatever their claim might be, even though we've gone through this non-tort system. And that was the issue that was under appeal. So am I incorrect in assuming then that is not the issue, that the issue that is under appeal was previous legislation and not this new tort or non-tort system?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So I think the distinction is this. So after May 1st, if you disagree, if you're in an accident and there's an award in terms of here's the benefits that you're going to get, if you disagree with those benefits, you can go to the Civil Resolution Tribunal. Okay? You can't sue, you can't get a lawyer tort in court to overturn the decision of the CRT. If there are some circumstances where you would be able to sue, again, let's say you were hit by a drunk driver, you would be able to punitively go after that individual on their insurance, but it would not impact, ICBC would not be paying for anything other than, you know, the award that you would be getting for the care that you need. And that would be the only way in which tort would be involved in a case, and it would be punitive to the individual and their insurance.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, interesting revelation for me then on that. So I guess I would ask, I guess I'm wondering what the reason the attorney would have to appeal the decision if it affects claims only up until May of 2021. And I guess what is the potential risk dollar-wise to the province for those claims that are outstanding then?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, the Attorney General would appeal the decision because it disagrees with it. ICBC has booked up to $390 million. And if we are right, as the Attorney General and ICBC believe we are right, then that is $390 million that, or up to $390 million that we are, not having to pay out.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, minus the litigation costs involved with that. So, okay, I will go on then. Can a claimant submit more than 3 expert witnesses and 3 reports going through the civil tribunal process?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. We will get back to you to get the exact wording in the regulation for you with the exact number and exactly what the wording specifically says.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So I look forward to that then. And I'm assuming it's, that because of the previous court challenge where the courts have stated that a person is entitled to submit more than 3. There's no limit on the number of experts or expert witness reports that are submitted. So that's the basis for the question that I asked. So I'll go on then to another area. How many times since 2017 has government, by way of OIC, directed the BCUC to fix ICBC rate increases at a level determined by government?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Once.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And what year was that?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. It was in 2020 for the and it was for the actuarially indicated rate, which turned out to be 0.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that ICBC depleted its basic equity capital reserves from over $3 billion in 2017 to negative $550 million in 2020. Are those numbers correct?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I thank the member for the question. So yes, those numbers are correct. We suspended the capital targets while we put in place the reforms to move to the current enhanced care system, and the service plan for ICBC indicates a recovery of the capital by 2023.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Has the Superintendent of Financial Institutions contacted ICBC since this depletion and directed them to increase their capital reserves pursuant to subsection 5153 of the Insurance Companies Act, the federal one.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. No.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So what is the minimum capital margins required by the Superintendent of Financial Institutions for ICBC?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The Superintendent of Financial Institutions does not regulate ICBC.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting. So who regulates ICBC and what is the, so does ICBC not fall under the, that federal statute at all? And who regulates ICBC otherwise?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So in terms of regulation, particularly when it comes to basic insurance, that would be done by the Utilities Commission.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So I do see in other jurisdictions where the provincially owned insurance companies, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, are falling under that federal, the Insurance Companies Act. But I just go to section 515(1) of that act, and my understanding was that it applied to all insurance companies selling property liability insurance. And 515(1) says a company and society shall, in relation to its operations, maintain adequate capital and adequate and appropriate forms of liquidity, and shall comply with any regulations in relation to adequate capital and adequate and appropriate forms of liquidity. So are you saying that the ICBC is exempt from that federal legislation that applies to all insurance companies in Canada?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So Saskatchewan, Manitoba, their basic will be provincially regulated, not federally. The optional business, we're not aware in those two provinces of it being regulated federally either.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so how does ICBC determine what the minimum capital margins should be for their operations, and what do they use for criteria to determine that?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So when it comes to the basic, there is a regulation in place that's put in place by the Utilities Commission. We follow that regulation, obviously. When it comes to the optional, we follow the guidelines at the federal level. We're not required to follow them, but we do follow the guidelines.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So the guidelines basically stipulate that 99% of the expected shortfalls over a 1 year period of time have to be maintained as a confidence level. So I'm curious as to what does the regulation stipulate for the minor capital test for ICBC? What has to be maintained on a regular basis?
Sure.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So on the basic, the minimum capital target is 100%.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And what is that 100% figure today?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So for Q3, the number is 72%.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking for a dollar figure, if the minister could give me a dollar figure as to what that 100% looks like.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. On the 100% on the capital is $2 billion.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So that's the minimum capital test for the basic business line. In the figures I have indicate that, in 2020, there was negative $301 million in that account. So basically, it's overdrawn by $300 million at that particular time. But also the optional one, and the minister did reference the fact that the federal superintendent, they follow the guidelines for the optional equity test. And I'm just wondering what that figure would be for the optional side of the insurance, because my figures here show that there's a deficit in that account of about $246 million as well at this particular time.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. And so while they're busy calculating the optional number, I just want to let the member know, because when he said the account, in essence, 300 million into the bad, in the deficit, the reality is as of Q3, it's 1.5 billion to the good.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So if I get this correct, then the 2019-2020 fiscal year, the optional and the basic side combined were in arrears by about $550 million. But now we are in June of 2021, and the balance is in the basic or the combined? Basic. The basic is just over $1 billion, did you say?
1.5 billion.
1.5 billion. Thank you. That's a pretty significant increase within a very few months. Good to hear, but it still leaves us in a bit of a deficit position. So I'll just, a couple more questions related to this. Order in Council 633 that was recently signed, I believe it was in December, government has extended the rating period from 12 months to 23 months. Does this mean that the minimum capital test determination is also extended to that 23-month period of time, or is it still on a 12-month rotation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So in regards to that basic capital test, and the rate filing, so yes, it was suspended for the 23 months. The target was suspended, but the building up of the the minimum capital test continues. So it's the target that's suspended, but the building up of that capital test continues.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just curious as to why government extended the rating period from 12 to 23 months in the first place.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So it was done basically to provide stability and certainty for customers during the transition period from the old to the new system.
Member. Thank you, Chair. Also, as I understand OIC 633, government has directed the BCUC to reduce premiums by 15%, but worked into that formula is 11.5% surcharge designed to rebuild the basic capital reserves. Is that correct?
Sure.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So we reduced rates by 15%, and then we're rebuilding the capital, in essence, for rate stabilization by 11.5%. That's what's taking place. It's not a surcharge.
Member.
Okay, so I get this rate. So the rates have been reduced by 15%, and that contributes to an 11.5% increase into the minimum capital equity program. Is that on an annual basis? Is that over the 23-month period of time, or what's this 11.5% calculated over?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So the way it works is by removing tort from the equation, ICBC saves about 26.5%. So 15% is used to lower rates, and the other 11.5% is to get the capital test back to where it needs to be.
Member.
Thank you for the answer, Minister. So how long will it take ICBC to meet the minimum capital margins required, not only for the basic under the BCUC directive, but also the optional as set out by the Superintendent of Financial Institutions?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Fiscal 22-23.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Under the policy guidelines for minimum capital tests published by the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, it states that insurers are required to meet the MCT capital requirements at all times. And of course, ICBC has chosen to go a different route with that for their basics, but not for their optional. So with ICBC not meeting the minimum requirements, does this transfer the risk to BC taxpayers?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. The answer is no. We're rebuilding the capital that got run down under a previous administration.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the figures here, I see that it depleted from about $3.1 billion in 2017 to negative $500 million in 2020, but and now it's being rebuilt again. I can understand where the minister's coming from to a degree. But will the government of British Columbia be required to cover off if there's any catastrophic events beyond the capacity of ICBC's capital reserves? And if the government's not covering it off, who would cover off these if ICBC is incapable?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So we will be fully capitalized in the next 1 to 2 years. And at the same time, we also have reinsurance to deal with catastrophic situations such as an earthquake, for example, to make sure that we are in a good position.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Is there a reason why ICBC chooses to ignore the direction and the advice of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions when it comes to, the statement that they say that insurers are required to meet the MCT capital requirements at all times, full stop. So why is ICBC choosing to go an independent route on their own?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So, as I said, we'll be fully capitalized in the next 1 to 2 years. We're not regulated by the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. We never have been, even when you guys were government. It's been that way for a very long time.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And I guess it goes back to my roots. I always look at the bases, the authorities for government or anybody to do anything. There's always some kind of legislation that gives the authority for somebody to act. So I'm wondering if the minister can refer me to the authority that provides the exemption of not complying with Section 515 of the Insurance Companies Act. All insurance companies across Canada are required to abide by that particular statute, and I'm just wondering where the authority lies for ICBC not to abide by that same legislation.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So as a Crown-owned entity, the province has the ability to say who it is regulated by and who it is not regulated by. And in this case, as I've said earlier, when it comes to BASIC, we are regulated by the Utilities Commission, and that's in place. And while we're not regulated at the federal level by OFSI, we do follow the guidelines, and so that's where the authority comes in, and that's what's in place.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So, it's not immediate, but just for my own benefit as critic, I guess, if the minister could direct me to the authority, the legislative authority, where Crown-owned entities don't have to abide by specific legislation that's laid out for, in this case, insurance companies across Canada, or where does that sit? I know it must be somewhere within the legislation that we currently have.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I think what's probably best if I'm happy to set up a briefing for you with ICBC, because the regulatory framework that we're operating on and been talking about was actually set up prior to your arrival here in the House in the early 2000s. So I'll be more than happy to get that set up for you. Okay.
Member.
I appreciate the minister's offer in that respect. So I guess one final question on this area is, who made the decision to deplete the equity capital reserves to such a to minus $500 million in the hole versus raising the premium? So by reducing the equity reserves from where they should be at that $2 or $3 million point, if you add both basic and the optional together, who made the decision to lower that rather than raise the rate so that you're not in violation of the federal legislation and the guidelines that were set out by the Superintendent of Financial Institutions.
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So I think that the issue the members is referring to can really be traced back to 2015 and 2016 when government directed ICBC to apply for a rate increase, if you like, that did not meet the needs of ICBC, and then further directed ICBC to transfer the optional net income to offset any rate gap. And that's what started the downward trend in ICBC's finances. And so that's really where all this started. And what has been taking place since is the effort to redress that, which is to move to an enhanced care system, which has resulted in lower premiums, and at the same time to rebuild those capital reserves, and that's what's been underway.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So the information that I have indicates that the capital reserves in 2015 were combined about 3.1 billion, and in 2017 about 2.4 billion. But then 2018 they dropped to 987 million, and then 119 million in 2019 to 547 in the red in 2020. This government has been in position since 2017. Was there nothing that could have been done to stop the liability or the drastic reduction of the minimum capital test or the equity and capital reserves to the point where it puts ICBC in a very dangerous financial position?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the comments from the member. So, I mean, I suppose had, $1.2 billion between 2010 and 2013 not been taken out, it would have been there to help, ICBC. I suppose if ICBC had not been allowed to get the rate increases that it was actually seeking, and were outlined in that report that went to cabinet, and I guess if, and resulted in that crisis that government was made aware of prior to the 2017 election, and nothing was really said about it, other than, I know not this member, but another member who said, when the discussion was, ICBC rates need to go up, I forget if it was 15 or 16%, but it was, don't worry, it's only going up, no, 3%. I mean, I suppose if those things back then had been addressed, we might have been in a better position. And I guess in 2017, we could have also dealt with the situation perhaps by raising ICBC rates by, 25 or whatever significant number to meet the gap that was there based on the way the system was. Or we could do what we did, which was to go, you know what? The way to address this is to move to a system of enhanced care, to look at what's happened in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where they've got a system that's resulted in stabilized lower rates over a long period of time, and better care for individuals for as long as people need that care. And that's the decision that we made, and I think we've made the right decision, because I think we're now on the right track.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the minister's description. And I know we're running short of time here, so I'll just ask one question. It's been a series of complaints that I know a number of constituency offices around the province have received. We've heard several BC residents complaining about their ability to take driver's tests or to renew their licenses. But when I reviewed the budget estimates, it appears that ICBC will be reducing the number of FTEs involved in driver's licensing from 645 to 585. Why is this the case, considering all of the complaints we see in our offices and in the media?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question from the member. So that number is a forecast, and it's been based on the work on the anticipated number of tests, for example. So we hired 80 additional testers. We are testing in 10 different locations. We've done 36% more Class 5 and 6 this year, and so it'll all depend on, is there a backlog or what needs to be done. But we recognize the issue, and that's why we took those additional steps. But that is just at this point a forecast, and no final decision has been made on where that number will end up.
Member.
And just one follow-up to that, and I want to thank the minister and his staff for the patience they've exhibited over the last couple of days involved in this. But so the follow-up question is 36% more than last year, or 36% pre-COVID?
Thank you, Honourable Chair. That's 36% more than in 2019.
Thank you, member. Does that conclude your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, I ask the minister if they would like to make any closing remarks before I call the vote.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I want to thank the member for what I think has been a good discussion on a wide range of issues, and I appreciate his insight and his commentary. And I know we've made a number of commitments and some information that we will get back to him with, and written and in terms of in-person briefings. And any questions that he had follow up in terms of members that have, just let us know, and we will deal with those questions. And thanks very much.
Thank you, Minister, and all members. Seeing no further questions, I will now call the vote. Those participating remotely should prepare their voting cards. Those in favor indicate aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Motion's carried. Thank you, members. I now recognize the Minister to move the next vote.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 40 be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $36,420,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General Emergency Program Act.
Thank you, Minister. I will now call the vote. Those participating remotely should prepare their voting cards. Those in favor indicate aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate nay. Motion's carried. Thank you, members. Thank you, members. The committee will now take a 5 to 10 minute recess while we prepare for the Ministry of Transportation. I call the Committee of Supply Section C back to order. We're meeting today to consider the budget estimates of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. I now recognize the Minister to move the vote.
Vote number 43, resolve that a sum not exceeding $948,948,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, Ministry operations to 31st of March 2022.
Thank you, Minister. Do you have any opening remarks?
I want to thank the critic to begin with, and thank the entire Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure team and my Minister of State, I'm not allowed to say her name, the Minister of State for Infrastructure. And I want to introduce my Deputy Minister, Kay Krishna, who is here with me in person, and she will help me answer questions from the critic and other members of the opposition. And I just thought I would begin by giving a few highlights of the set of estimates, the budget and service plan under consideration today and ending today and tomorrow, I think. This is a budget that was developed by government and our ministry in consideration of helping British Columbia come back stronger from the pandemic. It's a budget that ensures that services that government invests in are working for people, for businesses, for communities today, and as we build back for the future. Critically important as we turn towards recovery is my ministry's commitment to provide affordable, efficient transportation options for all British Columbians. These are the things that guide our decisions in safe and reliable road infrastructure and affordable and convenient public transit, renewed investment in coastal and inland ferry services, active transportation network improvements, and other low-carbon, zero-carbon modes of transportation that help us meet our government-wide GHG emission reduction portfolio, targets rather. This is a budget that also helps us strengthen the economy by continuing to ensure that BC is a competitive jurisdiction where the movement of people and goods are done efficiently and supports critical trade corridors, among other areas what people's jobs and community well-being and the prosperity of our province rely upon. Overall, the budget includes a $20 million increase over the last service plan that was discussed. It's there are $1.86 billion in strategic public infrastructure investments in every part of the province, helping support resilient economic recovery. Over the next 3 years, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure is investing nearly $6 billion in transportation projects across BC, and when you consider federal and other government, other partner contributions, it's a $7.6 billion expenditure investment over the next 3 years on the capital side. This includes many major projects that will unlock economic opportunities for British Columbians and major job corridors. Among them are the $1.081 billion for the Broadway subway that is a component of the set of estimates before us, $823 million for the Patella Bridge replacement of a total $1.377 billion project. Nearly $850 million for Highway 1 four-laning program improvements to the Alberta border. $819 million for the highway corridor rehabilitation across the province. $395 million for side road improvements across the province, which is critically important to rural and remote communities. $101 million for safety improvements. Over $1.1 billion for highway improvements across the province. $749 million for transit infrastructure, and $57 million for community and other projects are included in this. We continue in this budget our funding commitment of 40% of the capital costs of the Mayor's vision for TransLink projects, and we've accounted for this in our own 10-year transportation investment plan. Number of safety improvements that I referenced earlier include $819 million for highway corridor improvements, the side road improvements program of nearly $400 million, and $101 million over 3 years for safety projects. This includes things like intersection improvements, snow avalanche infrastructure, guardrail, and livestock fencing installation. Through the economic recovery plan in 2020, we invested $20 million in 80 shovel-ready community-based projects in Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, creating hundreds of good-paying jobs at a time when that was most needed, and helping to restart supply chains and activate economic activity across BC. We continue to move forward with Clean BC, and we introduced the Move, Commute, Connect, BC's first ever active transportation strategy, focused on making walking, cycling, and other modes of active transportation more safe, convenient, and accessible. And this is well timed, I think, with the significant increase during the COVID-19 pandemic of interest in walking and cycling for transportation and recreation in BC. We're committed to a long-term clean growth strategy that includes improving our active transportation networks. This is nearly $60 million over the next 3 years, including $31.5 million in Clean BC funding. Things like investing in electric vehicle charging stations and funding the heavy-duty vehicle efficiency program. Moving on, and I will conclude shortly, some of the major projects that are of importance to different parts of the province: investments in North Vancouver, including the Mountain Highway, Mount Seymour Parkway, Delta, improvements along their highway corridors to increase travel safety and efficiency. Langley, widening 10 kilometers of Highway 1 between 216th and 264th Street to accommodate new high occupancy vehicle lanes, including reconfiguring the 232nd Street interchange with new underpasses at Glover Road and the CP Rail crossing. Here in Saanich, in the traditional territories where I am today, there's a project, Highway 17, the Keating Crossroads flyover, which has been a long-identified safety improvement project. Improvements continue on Highway 14 out to Souk. In the Kootenays, in terms of inland ferries that are referenced, new vessels with twice the capacity of the existing MV Balfour will be able to carry between 50 and 60 vehicles once they're purchased, built, and put into service on the Kootenay Lakes. Lillooet as well, stabilizing the 10-mile slide on Highway 99, approximately 17 kilometers northeast of Lillooet, is a critically important project to connect that community after that devastating slide. Similarly, rebuilding damaged infrastructure in Quesnel along the West Fraser Road, approximately $103 million project, is part of this budget as well. Port infrastructure, I mentioned the movement of goods and the importance of our western trade corridor for the rest of the country and all provinces and territories. This budget includes $40 million for the first time ever, provincial investments in the ports of Prince Rupert and Nanaimo, which will help increase import and export capacity and supports BC's economic recovery plan. We'll continue to work with taxi and ride-hailing as a mode of ground transportation that has been deemed essential, and we thank all those workers who continued to serve British Columbians throughout the pandemic. That is part of this budget as well. And in terms of public transit, communities served right around British Columbia by our Crown Corporation BC Transit. This budget includes $377.8 million in operating contributions and $231.4 million in capital contributions, leading to a number of exciting projects in communities right around BC. In the midst of this pandemic, we signed an agreement, and it was finalized in December of 2020. Significant restart agreement that kept transportation services flowing, an agreement with Ottawa that provided well over $1 billion to keep funding during drastically reduced service levels or fare levels on BC Transit, TransLink, and BC Transit. In the case of TransLink, that funding amounts to $644 million. In the case of BC Ferries, $308 million. And BC Transit has received $86 million from our government, the federal government, to make sure that we recover ridership and that services are there for people when they need them as we wind up and move forward to recovery from the pandemic. And with that, I'll thank the critic and look forward to his questions.
Thank you, Minister. I now recognize the member for Vancouver-Langara. Do you have any opening remarks?
Well, I think given the time that we have, even this afternoon, I'm going to go straight into my first question. We will certainly pick up along the way the various points that the Minister has shared with us and appreciate the overview in terms of where things stand. Obviously there's been lots of discussion, including in the House just an hour or two ago, about the cruise ship industry and where we are as a province in that situation. And I think it's important that we take the opportunity with the Minister, given the greater role that he is playing, as we understand, on this important matter for the province. If we could just have a really good understanding in terms of how the involvements have occurred, including with the federal government. We know that when the decision was made to close the border to cruise ships in 2020, Canada was the only jurisdiction to do so in a length of time of that. I would just ask through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister, what was the Minister's involvement in any discussions with the federal government and the cruise industry around the initial decision to close the border to cruise ships in 2020?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the member. The federal government did not consult my ministry, nor to my knowledge the province, on the border closings, although I expect that First Ministers did participate in the Prime Minister's decision way back in March 20th, I believe, was when borders were closed of 2020. And that was, of course, within a very close period of time when the province here was in lockdown. That initial border closing and port closing for Canadian ports was contemplated to be until July of 2020. It has since been extended twice. Most recently, it was extended February 5th of 2021. The Prime Minister announced that port closure would extend until February 28th of 2022.
Member.
Well, I appreciate the response from the Minister, and certainly given the nature of the pandemic as it was breaking in early 2020 or before, certainly can appreciate the lack of consultation that the Minister indicated that the federal government did not do with the province. So when that came about, though, in terms of the initial decision to close the border for cruise ships in that period, through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister, what was the communication, if any, from the Premier or the government to the federal government about that decision to close?
Minister.
As I say, I expect that the Prime Minister consulted all First Ministers in the country, but I do know that provincial and territorial governments were making decisions in real time. I don't recall that as Minister of Education back in March of 2020 that I consulted with the federal government about closing all schools, as we did, I believe it was March 14th. We were responding to a virus that had arrived on Canada and BC's shores that was beginning to spread in the community with clusters of outbreaks significantly affecting long-term care homes, and we made the decision very early on that we would have a science-led approach. The Provincial Health Office stepped up and began daily briefings for everybody in the province about how they should conduct themselves. It changed our lives, as the member well knows. It continues to. We're not through the pandemic yet. But what I would say to him, and I'm sure he'll get further into this in the debate, but the science-led approach that British Columbia has taken has made us one of the safest jurisdictions on the planet, with some of the lowest infection rates, highest recovery rates, and also I think we can be uniquely proud in British Columbia that as we emerged and knew more about the properties of this virus and how to be safe around one another, with different health restrictions in place, we became a province that was able to restart its economy much more quickly in a targeted way with industry developed protocols across all kinds of industries and business activities in the province, some of which are still not possible in the way that they would be beyond the COVID pandemic, but it has led British Columbia, that leadership approach, that science-led approach has enabled British Columbia to have the highest rate of job recovery, a significantly lower rate of economic contraction than economists had earlier predicted, and economists predicting a very strong rebound. I think the economic growth rates for the next fiscal year are projected to be around 4.5%, followed by a similar growth rate for the year thereafter. So in making the economic damage of COVID more shallow in British Columbia, it has made the recovery much stronger in British Columbia. So it has required definitely close cooperation between the federal and provincial governments and inter-provincially with other governments. But BC charted its own approach, one that I think we can be proud of on many, many scores. And we hope that ability, those learnings from being able to restart many industries in British Columbia are also going to help us have the federal government take that into account when it deals with the cruise industry.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just recognizing as it's been discussed in terms of BC's cruise ship industry representing a $2.7 billion economic impact every year and accounting for 20,000 jobs, including in all up and down our coastline here. I wanted to ask the Minister through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of, again, the decision to close the border to cruise ships during this period. When did the province then first engage with the federal government about the concern about the decision to close and the ongoing nature of that closure? When did the provincial government first start talking to the federal government about any concerns about the viability of the cruise ship industry in the period to come?
Minister.
Thank you. The first opportunity I had to speak with the federal minister, Minister Garneau as it was then, he's no longer the federal transportation minister, was in December 2020. We had a provincial and territorial leaders summit, wide-ranging, about COVID and transportation and ongoing safety programs and jurisdictional information sharing on COVID safety and essential workers in the transportation sector was certainly dominated the agenda. And the issue of Canada's port closures was discussed at that time. The decision, though, was, of course, federally taken. It is their jurisdiction. They brought the ban in, as I said earlier, March 2020. It was extended in July 2020, and it was renewed in February 2021. So really the issue became sort of heightened interest to BC after we realized that the federal government's call, the Prime Minister had ordered an additional 12-month extension of the closure of Canadian ports to the cruise ship industry. Now I should say that in February, on or about February 5th, 2021, when the Prime Minister made this announcement, 2.3% of Canadians were vaccinated. 0.1% of Canadians had had a second dose of vaccine. Many provinces, including our own, had a significant uptake of COVID infection. Some provinces were in lockdown. Ontario came out of the winter season very badly, for example. So I think governments were making very cautious decisions at that time, around February 5th, 2021, when the order was extended. And I think up until even recently, in our own provincial experience, it wasn't that long ago, I think March 29th, if I'm not mistaken, British Columbia had to deal with an additional wave of COVID infections and bring in the circuit breaker, go backwards on some of the health restrictions that we'd hoped to reduce, and that lasted up until only a few weeks ago. May 25th, if I'm not mistaken, was when the circuit breaker period was lifted. So in our own province, we have been struggling to ensure that case counts continue to decline, to make sure that people are conducting themselves safely. We put tremendous effort into my own ministry to discourage anything but essential travel within your own health authority. That's really been the emphasis over the last 4 to 12 weeks in our province. Don't forget, March 26th, we had a 7-day rolling average of 1,130 new cases every day, and our own provincial health office was telling us if we didn't take the circuit breaker steps, we'd be looking at 3,000 new cases a day. So we are very lucky here on a Monday, having just come through a weekend where there were fewer than 100 cases per day for the first time in a very, very long time.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the opportunity an hour or two ago to raise with the Premier on the floor of the House, and following other colleagues did the same. There was this letter, of course, from the Alaska delegation dated October 21st, 2020, addressed to the Prime Minister, and as I pointed out to the Premier was copied on this letter. And I first of all, let me just confirm that the Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, is aware of the contents of that letter.
Minister.
Thank you. I will have to rely on somebody who can advise me if I was even a minister in October 21st of 2020, because I believe government and the ballots had not been counted and government had not been sworn in at that time. But I have been copied on additional letters from that were sent to the Prime Minister by the 2 senators from Alaska.
Member.
Yes, and thanks for that clarification. Of course, on October 21st, that was still 3 days before the election day, and then what followed. But the letter itself, as far as we understand in the official opposition, is certainly a significant letter from the Alaska delegation to the Prime Minister of our country, talking about how we have the most extensive shared border with Canada, being the state of Alaska, and the dependency upon the ability, given the neighbors that we are, to be able to traverse cross-border travel. And so this letter, which is about 2.5 pages, talks about the importance of the connectivity between our jurisdictions, and raises with the Prime Minister, again copied to the Premier of the Yukon and the Premier of British Columbia, Minister of Public Safety, Minister of Health federally, and the ambassadors to the United States and from the United States to Canada, that this was an important letter that would set out the importance of that partnership and collaboration, in effect. And so since that time, at least on the record, the state of Alaska was raising the concerns of the ongoing restrictions between cross-border travel, and obviously dealing with the whole worldwide pandemic. We all understand that, and as the Minister has explained, certainly appreciate the challenge for all of us in this. But in terms of the economic impact, in terms of public safety, in terms of just being able to get across borders and dealing with situations during this period, that was a letter that was raised. And so, again, I understand the Minister just confirmed that presumably as the new Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, I would expect that was the first instance that he's indicated through you, Mr. Chair. Then December 2020 is when he had the opportunity to talk to his federal counterpart. Was there any discussion at that time in terms of the concerns of the state of Alaska?
Minister.
Thank you. I think the international discussion back in October 2020 about the cruise industry was universally pessimistic. Let's not forget there was not a single vaccine approved by the FDA in the United States or anywhere else in the world. There was not a single vaccine approved or even likely to be approved at that time by Health Canada. We were moving towards a winter period, which epidemiologists around the world had predicted would be hospitable to the transmission of the virus as people moved indoors. So I think it's fair to say that that would be one of the first things from the minds of government officials at that time, would be thinking about the cruise season. Now I know the Alaska industry had hoped, as their president did at that time, that it was just a flu and it would go away and it meant nothing. But they had a very realistic idea that in July of 2020, when Canada's port closure was renewed, that was not the case. Alaskans were getting sick just as British Columbians were getting sick, and COVID was well understood to be something real and something serious. And travel and reopening borders was not possible. In fact, European states reinstated their borders for the first time since the European Union had been a body politic. So the need to prevent populations from traveling and infecting one another had never been greater than it was in October 2020. We were, as a province, working on how people could go to work safely. Certainly as the transportation minister, the first thing that hit me was how we could continue to keep trade with the United States done safely through working with ports, working with the Longshoremen's Union, working with the BC Trucking Association and our cross-border shipments and receipt of goods. Those were the kinds of things that were overwhelmingly on the agenda of my ministry. I don't think it was realistic, with no vaccine and with hard border restrictions everywhere in the world, flights grounded, land borders closed, and ports closed, that was top of mind at that time.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the response from the minister. So in terms of between December 2020 and the decision to extend the cruise ship ban on February 5th, 2021, was there any further discussion between the province and the federal government in terms of the impact on the cruise ship industry of a potential extension of that ban?
Minister.
As I said, the federal government did not consult the provinces on closing ports in Atlantic Canada, on the St. Lawrence, everywhere that Canada has a cruise ship industry here on the West Coast as well. That decision was made for them by the federal government on February 5th, 2021. There has been subsequent discussion amongst provincial ministers, my counterparts, and that has been in connection with various provinces' restart plans. There's been a lot of hopefulness that has been dashed, that has been fulfilled to be realistically hopeful today. And I would note that this is a very good day for British Columbia, with the announcement by Dr. Henry and the Premier and the Minister of Tourism and Jobs and Economic Recovery and the Minister of Health, that British Columbians can now, or as of midnight, I believe, enjoy outdoor gatherings of 50 people. They can move to more in-person services. We will have some spectator attendance at events. And if all goes well, and we heard this very clearly, it's an if. We have to look at the next 2-week incubation period. July 1st will see us move even further ahead to stage 3. And finally, if all goes well through the summer, and we expect people to be conducting themselves in a safe manner and living within the guidelines as they change and internalizing those guidelines, things could look very different by Labor Day weekend on September 7th as we enter stage 4. So really, it's just been in the last couple of months that people have, and public health officials and governments, that brought in drastic measures like circuit breakers, have begun to see that the vaccine at 60 and 70% first dose rates is producing significant benefits to reduce transmission. We've accelerated the purchase from Pfizer and Moderna and other international suppliers here in Canada to accelerate second doses. It's no mistake that because of Canada's laboratory production situation, we were behind our southern neighbors, our U.S. cousins, for a period of time, but we're now in a much better situation. So I would say in the last couple of months in particular, the idea of reopening both the land, marine, and air borders with the United States has really been put into sight. But there's still a lot of work to do, and I know that our government's position is that it needs to continue to be science-led. We need to rely on our public health officials to say what are they seeing in our communities, what are they seeing as the risks, what are the safe practices. It's only been very recently that, for example, the United States Center for Disease Control has even published safe sailing certificate guidelines for the cruise industry. They're in the midst of of initiating trial sailing, so it's very, very early days on the U.S. side. Those trial sailings, by the way, are completely uneconomic. It's just designed to show that they can meet protocols. Most of those vessels will have about 10% of their normal passenger capacity. So they're trying to get their feet underneath them, which is understandable. The cruise ship industry has taken tremendous losses around the globe. The restart of the cruise industry is typically coming much later than other parts of economies restarting themselves. But we've heard from our industry that the Canadian decision on the ports has some impact on the cruise industry to be able to plan, because it's difficult for the cruise industry to live with uncertainty. That they know that at this moment, at this exact moment in time, the federal government has closed ports till February 28th, 2022. But they would like to know whether that's a hard date, whether there's an opportunity to, with a science-led approach in Canada, a pan-Canadian approach, it can be potentially sooner. But they'd also like to give a signal to the cruise line industry that they can begin planning and booking. And that's really the crux of the conversation I've been having with the cruise industry, with Port Authority CEOs and others, about how we can do this, how we can work with the industry, give them some certainty, because they are raring to come back, and it does look like there are some signs that those who enjoy cruise ship vacations are willing to get back to that type of vacation experience again. And of course, when we went into this pandemic in Vancouver, we had a record year of growth in 2019. I think we exceeded a million passenger boardings in Port Vancouver. We had a 22% year of growth over 2018. So we went into this pandemic on an extraordinary plane of growth, a trajectory of growth. And the industry wants to get back to where it was, which was to continue to make Vancouver a port that supports the Alaska cruise industry, and to have our other ports as ports of call that support the cruise experience traveling up the Inside Passage to Alaska.
Member.
Just if I can get the minister to confirm, because I think I heard that in the beginning of his response, that again, there was no federal government consultation with the province when they decided to extend the ban on February 5th, 2021. Is that correct?
Minister.
It was not to my office. I can't speak for all of government, but it was not to my office, and these are really the only estimates I can be responsible for.
Member.
Thank you for the response. Just in terms of the period of time when the minister became the new Minister of Transportation and had the meeting with his counterpart federally, and the period of time between that and when the ban was extended, was there ever any consideration within the government of British Columbia here in this province about the long-term impact under the Passenger Safety Vessel Act in terms of not being able to meet the requirement of a foreign stop for cruise ships that were traveling, say, from the United States up to Alaska? Was there any consideration or recognition of the impact of not being able to comply with that act for cruise ships.
Minister.
Okay, I think if I heard the member correctly, he was going back to the period between October and February of 2020 to. So what I will say is that I have I had met and raised issues around all border traffic and restrictions, air, land, and marine. Minister Garneau was replaced by Minister Algabra, so two different ministers I had occasion to speak with federally. Met, I don't have exact dates, with the Consul General as well. We had an opportunity to discuss that issue. And of course have met with members of federally delegated port authorities and tourism associations as well to get their views. But I will go back to, I think, the point I was trying to make to the member. Nobody was seriously considering as a top-of-mind concern in October of 2020 the cruise ship season. What we were concerned with was people dying in long-term care facilities, reducing the mortality rate, taking additional targeted health measures that would keep people safe, working with every type of business and industry in BC to have safe work practices. I, of course, have been very busy myself earlier in the pandemic trying to safely reopen schools as Minister of Education. So it was really a focus on our domestic population, keeping people safe, keeping the virus at low levels of infection, and also making sure that essential industries continued, and that includes cross-border trade. It's interesting that the Port of Vancouver actually grew during the pandemic. The number of TEUs and freight that went through our port throughout that year grew by a significant percentage, and our exports grew out of Prince Rupert and Vancouver as well. So I think that is a testament to everybody involved in the logistics supply chain in the country and in the province, that we went through in March 2020 to maybe May, shortages of goods, imported goods. Some store shelves were bare for things that people needed to buy for their daily lives. So we did go through a period of uncertainty, and we restored that aggressive growth in trade through our port. So that was really the kind of main area of focus. Those are some of the meetings that I was involved in. Yes, the cruise industry was discussed. I think that the federal discussion was preliminary. We certainly were asked our views after the fact, after the February 5th, 2021 decision was made.
Member.
Well, certainly we know of the significant impact of the cruise ship industry for Prince Rupert, Nanaimo, Port Alberni, Victoria, Vancouver, to name a number of stops that have been utilized for the Passenger Vessel Services Act requirements. And it's been said that Vancouver being a home port, Victoria being a port of call, that this is how much of our cruise ship industry, of course, has arisen here on the west coast of the country. The letter of February 12th, 2021 from Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, and Congressman Don Young for All for Alaska was again addressed to the Prime Minister and copied to the Premier. It leads in with the reference to, in their writing, in the same spirit of collaboration as the previous letter, which is the letter I previously cited to the Minister, dated October 21st, 2020. So we have two letters coming from the Alberta representatives, and Alaska representatives, different neighbor. And in terms of what was coming forward on the border and the impact, more specifically, of the decision to extend the ban on cruise ships carrying over 100 passengers until February 28, 2022. So first of all, let me confirm through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, that he is aware of the contents of this letter.
Minister.
Thank you. So with reference to the letter and probably subsequent letters, they're all addressed to the Prime Minister. They're all addressed to the decision maker on air, land, and port borders. The letter, I think the critic reference was a copy to the Premier's office. So certainly IGRS and other ministries and my ministry would have been involved in conversations with our federal counterparts. So my conversations in recent months have been with Minister Omar Al-Gabra, who I believe was sworn in the spring of this year, following Minister Garneau's being moved to Foreign Affairs. And so, yes, the letters for me would have been the jumping off point for discussions with Minister Al-Gabra. And we did actually have I did have an opportunity to talk to him about the substance of the Alaskan request, which was technical stops. We were confident that BC could meet that request. I told them that verbally. I put it in writing subsequently as well. That was and is BC's position, but events have somewhat overtaken that since. The U.S. Customs and Border Patrol has said that the idea of technical stops does not meet the current requirements of the passenger vessel, the PVSA. So it's really a kind of a moot point that in that bill that. In that correspondence from the senators. It was a great idea. I thought that it posed little to no health risk to British Columbians and Canadians. Nobody had a precise definition of whether it meant dropping anchor or whether it meant tying up, but it was clear that it's from their correspondence that it did not mean Americans disembarking and going on shore excursions and going to attractions and going to pubs and going to things like that and for the time being and during the pandemic. So we wanted to support the cruise industry getting to Alaska while we worked with the Canadian government about reopening borders. And we're at a point in time today during estimates where there are imminent discussions and announcements from the federal government. He's heard that. I've heard that from the Prime Minister around June 21st. Canadians are wanting details about when that might happen. Is it going to be staged? Will there be things like vaccine passports to keep people safe? What would guidelines look like for significant air travel between the U.S. and Canada? What are the metrics we're looking for in terms of testing, in terms of vaccine rates, in terms of, as I said earlier, the vaccine passport idea? Will that be possible to implement? You got 50 states in the U.S. They all do their vaccine records a little bit differently. How does that get presented to a customs and border official? I mean, these are all the kinds of active details, the complexities that are going into a federal decision around air, land, and port borders.
Member.
Well, I think this is an important, obviously with $2.7 billion of economic impact and 20,000 jobs on the line. And I would add that the letter in Alaska, from their perspective, there's 20,000 jobs in Alaska that are also dependent upon the cruise industry and this challenge. So there is a statement in the letter itself that says that, which is consistent with the letter originally that was sent on October 21st, 2020, which is, as neighbors and economic partners, we are discouraged by Canada's lack of outreach before announcing this long-term closure. While we anticipate and understand continued safety precautions, the extensive duration and scope of this ban is disappointing given the long-term negative impacts it causes. So, I think nothing that I'm reading in these letters suggests that they're not aware of the health challenges and the need to keep safe. But on this point, in February 12th, 2021, there's a letter coming from that Alaska delegation talking about how Canada has failed to engage. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, what engagement, if any, did the province have with these Alaska senators or representatives of the state of Alaska?
Minister.
So I can only answer for myself, but my job is to liaise with the federal government, the decision maker on our borders, and that's what I've been doing. So it probably would have been a bit odd and beyond protocol for me to phone, for example, Senator Murkowski as the Minister of Transportation for a province who does not have decision-making power on the federal port. My time is better spent working within government on the public health objectives that guided our restart, including the possibility of restarting the cruise ship industry, liaising with my federal counterpart, the Minister of Transportation, on whether that order extending the port closures till February of 2022 is one that would be revisited in light of vaccination rates and relative COVID safety around the province, whether it could be projected a bit sooner or whether they could at least assure the Americans that it won't be extended beyond February 2022. I think that's what you're hearing from the industry. They need some assurances to get their vessels and crews and their whoever they've borrowed money from to build ships and their suppliers and creditors and all of that going. I would note, though, that I took a cursory look at some of the major cruise ship companies that do operate in BC waters, and in this case, those that sell packages originating from Vancouver, which is very good for us because it usually involves airport travel, overnight stays, significant consumer spending, and then getting on the vessel, and then possibly stopping in Victoria and then going to Alaska. So I am pleased to see that there is already significant advertising online and in print by Holland America, by Princess Cruise Lines. The Disney Cruise Line is also advertising their 7-night cruise package departing from Vancouver, heading to Anchorage. Cunard Lines is advertising a BC Alaska cruise package already for the spring of 2022. Celebrity Cruise is also marketing Vancouver Alaska cruise products, and Seabourn Cruise Line has announced an opening date of May 27th, 2022. So the industry is looking forward to getting back to what were highly regarded, highly rated, and for them, highly profitable vacation packages going through the Inside Passage of British Columbia, beginning in the spectacular world-class city of Vancouver, and going to enjoy Alaskan glaciers and Alaskan seafood and all those things that are part of the two-nation experience, which I think is why they were on such a incredible growth trajectory. Since we formed government, 2018 was a record year. 2019 grew 22% over 2018. So going into this pandemic, we were in an enviable market position. And I know that our counterparts in the other Canadian provinces that want to reopen, want to welcome back, rather, the cruise industry, going out of the St. Lawrence, leaving Halifax Harbor, connecting to the U.S. seaboard. They're eager for federal clarity as well. So where it stands is that Prime Minister has suggested that there will be a comprehensive announcement on on June 21st, so in about a week's time, about what border reopenings are going to look like in Canada. That's for airports, that's for our land border, that's for ports, and I think the industry that operates out of British Columbia is very keen, and they appreciate that we've raised their concerns that what the industry needs right now during these uncertain times and after a very difficult long period of relatively, well, almost no business, that they need to be able to have some restart guidelines and dates that they can work around to get their business activities resumed.
Member.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, what date was the Minister briefed about this February 12th letter?
Minister.
I can't give a specific date, but I can say that that topic has been the subject of a number of meetings between myself, my federal counterparts, provincial and territorial leaders, ministry staff, and other parts of government. So when specifically I talked to which CEO of which port authority, I can't say to the member. I can just say that the letter from the Alaskans, which raised some good ideas, which we agreed with and conveyed to Ottawa around technical stops. As I said, that's subsequently been disproven as a strategy from the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. That's been something that we've been working on for several months, even at a time when government was very busy with the circuit breaker program, keeping people safe in British Columbia. I don't know and not aware of the opposition ever taking a position on when they wish to see cruise ships resume. I haven't heard them say anything, say back in October of 2020. I haven't heard them say anything around the winter of 2020. I haven't heard them say much in the early months of 2021. In fact, I didn't hear them say anything. I can't see a press release on the BC Liberal website in reaction to the February 5th, 2021 announcement for the Prime Minister. What I do remember, though, very clearly is that on May 6th, the BC Liberal House Leader called for a hard enforced border with Alberta. He actually called for something that's completely unconstitutional, but he wanted to restrict Canadians, Albertans. He wanted to try and pass a law or enforce some kind of order that a province cannot do on citizens of another province. So to suggest that working with the cruise industry on different federal dates that are made by federal decision makers was top of mind for the BC Liberal Caucus. I don't see it. Their concern seems to have been right up till May 6th, we're only talking 5 weeks ago, was putting up borders, not reopening them. So,
Member.
Mr. Chair, we'll have an opportunity to, if the minister wants to engage on when the opposition raised questions about this topic, I'm happy to go through that in detail, and that's my intention. But we're not there yet. We're still talking on February 12th. So I am trying to have the minister, Mr. Chair, focus on the topic at hand, which is February 12th. And so given the minister's response, when the minister was briefed on the letter of February 12th, that he cannot recall when he was briefed on, he cannot confirm to myself what that date was. What was the minister's reaction when he saw the statement that the Alaska representatives were greatly discouraged by the lack of outreach relating to this decision to extend the cruise ship ban for a year until February 28th, 2022? What was the minister's response to that, and what action did he take?
Minister.
well, again, on February 12th, 2.3% of Canadians had a first dose of vaccine. 0.1% of Canadians had a second dose of vaccine. We were preoccupied with getting our people vaccinated. I think people hoped that there might be something to rescue of the cruise season in 2021. But I think way back in February, and maybe the minister had a crystal ball that we didn't have, but I think way back in February, Canadians and British Columbians were concerned about preventing their loved ones from dying, preventing the chains of COVID transmission from reactivating themselves. And in fact, COVID did reactivate, and we had to take additional health restrictions all through the spring. In fact, from March 29th to the end of May, for 2 months, we brought in additional health restrictions. We're just literally 2.5 weeks past the dropping of COVID circuit breaker restrictions in British Columbia. We had great news today, June 14th, about moving forward to stage 2. We have great news that Dr. Henry is confident that July 1st could hold as the date at which we move forward to stage 3. And if we have a summer that keeps COVID transmission down, it'll be even better news come September 7th when we go into stage 4.
Member.
The minister used the word preoccupied, and I think that that is a fair word to use, because as we look back at the timeline, again, that first letter from the Alaska delegation, the so-called canary in the coal mine, or whatever mine you want to refer to, came on October 21st, 2020, and we were in the middle of an election. What happened after that election? Cabinet needs to be appointed. New Minister of Transportation. I know in speaking with representatives of the cruise ship industry that they were previously speaking to the predecessor of this minister and not getting a response, not getting the engagement. So it's not surprising to me that the minister's responses to date have been, we weren't consulted by the federal government. It may well be that when you see the letter come across on February 12th, to this government as a copy, that the proposal, despite the strong message of being discouraged, this whole preoccupation is understandable, particularly when you call an unnecessary election in the middle of a pandemic. Sound effects. It's pouring water.
It's the building intercom. It's not you.
It's not really us, I think. It's really us.
Oh, okay. Should I just, okay. So that period of time from the end of October until February 12th. I'm not hearing, Mr. Chair, a direct engagement about the issue.
Members, we'll have a brief recess for technical issues. Thank you, members. Continue.
I was, Mr. Chair, just talking about the period of time between the end of October and February 12th, and the importance of that period. Because there was an opportunity where the state of Alaska, through their representatives, was reaching out to our Prime Minister and the Premier as the two lead representatives, of course, of our country and our province, asking for engagement, for collaboration, for figuring out what would be the challenge here. And then, of course, on February 12th, as the minister does acknowledge, the Alaska representatives do talk about their concerns about how do we deal with the, in their words, the extreme measure of a 1-year total ban, and asking for sincere consideration of a variety of options, including robust health protocols and the employment of technical stops, which may constitute a safe yet reasonable compromise to solving this dilemma. So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate that the minister is talking about today. But today, of course, we are under a temporary ban of a different sort in terms of not requiring technical stops or stops here in British Columbia under the Alberta Tourism Recovery Act, which we will come to. And then a threat of a permanent ban. The need to not require any further stops in British Columbia. So there's a structural change that has occurred here. I know the government has said that's of a temporary nature, and we will talk about that. But there was an opportunity between October 21st and February 12th to engage. And with respect, I don't think it's good enough just to say, well, that was the federal government. There was a role. We are directly impacted by what has happened since February 12th. And the representatives from the state of Alaska did give notice on October 21st, 2020 and February 12th, 2021. So again, through you, Mr. Chair, to the minister, I would invite him to again describe what specific actions the government of British Columbia did after it received a copy of this letter to address the concerns in the letter.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what I can tell the members is that I have been working with the Premier's office. I've been working with Intergovernmental Relations Secretariat. We have had I have had meetings with my counterparts. The Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture has been involved with this file, and the Transportation Ministry working with our counterpart, the Minister of Transportation in Ottawa. But we've also had many meetings with airlines, starting restart funding for our own domestic small carriers. We've had meetings with YVR and other international airports in British Columbia, all about what a safe restart looks like, respecting that the federal government does control those decisions, but also getting those entities information they need about what safety protocols might look like when they reopen. Our focus is on the reopening. The reopening looks like it will have some additional clarity and new information that will come from the Prime Minister. He said that on June 21st. He is leveraging a very strong bilateral relationship that he has with President Biden, which I think is good. The bill that the senator in Utah has introduced is a concern, for sure. It's a concern because, I mean, what kind of signal does it send, first of all? Canada and the United States have to help each other's economies recover. Canada and the United States, and if we're talking about the cruise industry on our west coast and from the Pacific Northwest through to Alaska, is something that benefits tremendously both of our economies and our workers. It's something that has been a growing and strong industry, innovative practices, getting greener. Port investments are significant and continue to be significant. Upgrades, new berths, new terminals. This is very important to us. Should be noted that this isn't the first time that somebody from a landlocked state has tried to amend what is in effect coastal legislation in the United States. The Jones Act, just since 2010, has been attempted to be repealed in part or in whole 5 different times, including 4 times under the previous government. So this does happen from time to time, but we've got to make sure that that our Prime Minister carries a position about reopening borders with the Americans, air, land, and sea, that is based on a public health approach. That's what's guided us through the pandemic. It's based on metrics around vaccination rates. There are discussions, as I mentioned earlier, about what vaccine passports could look like, what kind of proof that could involve when you come into Canada or when Canadians go into the United States, because we're not going to have a sustainable tourism industry with 2-week quarantines on either side. We've got to figure a way through this. And we are getting very recently to the point where the end is in sight of the pandemic. And I guess it was the Prime Minister's best guess that he couldn't see an end in sight until at least February 28th, 2022 for the cruise ship industry. And I'm sure that the federal government, and they have heard British Columbia, is beginning to formulate some views that may be different on that. That was certainly a guess that was made in February 5th of 2021, which, as I told the member a couple of times now, we had 2.3% vaccine rates. We had people dying, infections going up in most provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, out of control, British Columbia becoming an area of concern. But where we are today, and I heard Dr. Henry say it in her briefing this morning, is that we're in a different place. Dr. Henry is engaged with the U.S. Center for Disease Control that developed the conditional sailing certificates for the cruise ship industry in the United States. She is working with other provincial health officers and Dr. Tam on what a made in Canada set of circumstances, or conditions I should say, precautions on the cruise industry to operate safely might look like. And I was very encouraged by the confidence that Dr. Henry had that we could accomplish this in Canada. She was very, she said herself that there's very strict guidance in place that the CDC has developed in the U.S. In some cases, I'm not sure if it's a cruise line requirement or if it's a CDC requirement, but we're talking about vaccination rates that meet or exceed 90 to 95% of their passengers. So that's something that our Center for Disease Control here in British Columbia can work with the U.S. Center for Disease Control on. They've obviously reviewed all those very recent announcements about what a conditional sailing certificate looks like. So this is happening in real time, and I'm pleased to see public health officials also responding, because what I do know about Ottawa is that they do share this with British Columbia. They have insisted that we not have political rhetoric and politicians making decisions on a whim without scientific advice. It's the strength of our response to containing COVID, keeping people safe, keeping communities safe, has been our willingness to surrender the limelight that maybe some premiers enjoy, and having the scientists lead us out of this health crisis.
Member.
So just to bring the minister back to the question that I'm trying to address with him, when we look at the bottom of that February 12th letter, they raised the possibility of technical stops. When this was raised, what was the province's response?
Minister.
Thank you. So what I can recall is that when this idea was raised, after government had some time to consider it, we felt in British Columbia, and when we had an opportunity to meet with the federal government, that the idea of technical stops had merits. I believe, although I never had a direct conversation with Dr. Henry about this, she thought it was workable as well. But I should probably not put that on the record, but that's my understanding, is that at least public health officials thought that technical stops, because they did not involve people from a different country, in this case the United States, at a time when vaccination rates were unknown and people were being asked to deal in a lot of hypotheticals, because don't forget, the minister keeps quoting from this letter of February 12th, 2021, there was a lot of hypotheticals as to whether we'd be able to rescue any of this summer, whether we would be out of the woods in terms of vaccination rates, and we were at a very, very low percent at that time. We really didn't have the virus under control. It was going to go where it was going to go, and we were in winter-like conditions, indoor settings, all of the things that put us at a disadvantage around COVID. But what I can say is that the discussion I've had with the Premier, with the Minister of Tourism, and with others in our government, my ministry staff, has been that the technical stop idea that was proposed by the Alaskans had merit, and if public health officials in our province felt the same, that we should be working with Ottawa on responding to that. Don't forget, the letter was written to the Prime Minister. I have no idea if he responded to the Alaskan senators. I trust that he did. I trust that he is in the habit of answering correspondence from all of his constituents, and especially when it has U.S. Senate letterhead on it. But I don't know for a fact, because I wasn't copied on the Prime Minister's response, if in fact there was one.
Member.
So, Mr. Chair, the minister has described the general position or view of the provincial government in terms of technical stops. When was that view formalized, or when did that come about? Was that before or shortly after February 12th, or when exactly was that view formed?
Minister.
Sometime after February.
Member.
Was it before February 24th?
Minister.
Again, the answer to the minister, to the member rather, is I had a number of discussions with inside government. I know that provincial health officials were having discussions with their counterparts within our BC Centre for Disease Control, what those exact dates were. I'm not privileged to know all that. It's a very odd line of questioning we're getting into here in a set of budget estimates for the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. I can't wait for a question on the Broadway subway line or rural roads and highways investments, because I look forward to answering the members' questions on those sorts of things. But what I have done here is describe that my attention was given to the substance of the letter. I was not copied on that letter. I did receive it. I can't remember when I received it. It led to discussions with my counterpart in Ottawa and with industry and port officials throughout the spring period. And I think we've had many opportunities now to make our views known to Ottawa, in the hopes that that the Prime Minister will consider that, given where we are in the pandemic and using their own health metrics, which I assume are very similar to BC's, and that they're guiding the conversation about reopening the border with the United States, that those views have been heard. I am not for certain whether every province has the exact same view. I know the federal government would like to have a pan-Canadian approach, possibly a staged approach on what border reopening looks like. I know the Premier will have an opportunity to talk to the Prime Minister again when he returns from the G7 on Thursday to be able to have additional conversations, and I believe he has a First Minister's meeting with all of the provincial and territorial leaders in advance of that this week. So we're in real time right now about what federal decisions will be on our ports, on our airports, and our land borders. And I think BC has been able to use the opportunities it has with its federal counterparts to talk about the importance of restoring tourism, when it's safe to do so, what some of the components about a safe tourism restart would look like. Of course, focusing on a strong domestic tourism season right now. We heard more about that today, June 14th, about people being able to travel between health authorities. I know that you cannot get a booking in some of the resort communities and tourism economies around BC right now, so it looks like British Columbians are embracing the tourism recovery as they best can right now under the public health guidance that they have right now, and we will look forward to opportunities for additional clarity from Ottawa on our ports and our airports, and what role rapid testing will have, what role COVID vaccine passports might play as a degree of assurance and safety. And I know that the provincial health officer, most importantly, has been reviewing the scientific principles underneath the U.S. Center for Disease Control, which has only recently got around to coming up with a set of safe sailing conditions. I believe the industry is only operating on a trial basis right now in the United States. So these are uneconomic sailings just to test out those protocols. They're hoping perhaps to have more fully booked sailings in July and August, but they're looking at a very limited recovery, to be clear, in 2021. The CDC says you can only have 50 to 70% of passengers, so there will be a lot of empty cabins on those ships. But they're hoping to get a start, and I think what I've heard from the industry is that what success looks like for trying to recover as much as they can of the 2021 cruise season on the U.S. side is 5 or 10% of what their pre-pandemic market was. So whether BC can be a part of that, based on the federal decision, as I say, we've brought influence to bear, we've made views known about how to do it safely. We're going to have Dr. Henry and Dr. Tam see whether we can adapt the US CDC guidelines and whether they're willing to look at modifying the order that they brought in that currently closes our ports until February 28th, 2022.
Member.
Again, Mr. Chair, the reason why I'm reviewing this is because there was a significant structural change that happened that's been referred to as the most significant change to the Passenger Vessel Services Act in modern history. That's what that change was viewed as. And so it's important to consider what happened, again, given that it was the Alaskan Congressman Don Young who introduced the Alaska Tourism Recovery Act in the House of Representatives on February 24th, 12 days after this letter. And so it's important to ask the minister, as I just did. He suggested the government came to a view on technical stops. I asked the question whether it was before February 24th. He was not able to answer that question. So if that's the case, I will note as well that on February 24th, the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure wrote to the Canadian ambassador, noting that Canada plays an integral role in supporting cruise-related travel and tourism in Alaska and other jurisdictions, and requesting that Canada and the U.S. find a mutually agreeable solution, possibly including permitting stops in Canadian waters without disembarking passengers, known as technical stops, to meet the minimum requirements of the Passenger Vessel Services Act. So two things happened on February 24th, both the introduction of the bill, the Alaska Tourism Recovery Act, as well as this communication to the Canadian ambassador. Given that I don't have clarity in terms of what happened between February 12th and February 24th, can the minister give me clarity as to what happened on February 24th when this bill this act was tabled in the House of Representatives.
Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Welcome to this committee. So I can't recall exactly what my activity was on February 28th, if I believe what this member was asking about, but I do know that we did have an opportunity to communicate that on the issue of technical stops, that that might be something workable. It subsequently was deemed unworkable by the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. I have lately been working with the cruise ship industry and my counterpart in Ottawa, just to present some views so that he knows what the industry and the ports are thinking here on the West Coast, respecting that the decision is federal, respecting that the Prime Minister will be meeting with premiers about this, respecting general border reopening policies. So I look forward to additional details from the Prime Minister June 21st. I am thankful for everybody in British Columbia who's played a role keeping our families, our loved ones, our friends safe during the pandemic, including in the transportation sector. And particularly our public health leaders. They have done an incredible job allowing parts of our domestic economy to reopen. They've kept people safe. They've allowed economic activity to happen to the greatest and safest extent possible. And I believe that Dr. Henry and people like Dr. Tam are critically important to what Ottawa's decision will look like on a staged reopening of the border. I don't know exactly what it will look like, and neither does a member opposite, but I do know we've had the opportunity to provide significant input, to provide ideas. But the primary idea that we begin with is listen to the scientists, listen to public health officials, because they will outline what a safe international airport like YVR can look like, knowing that there's still lingering COVID. They're the ones that are on top of the Delta variants that pose some threat that we may recede back into some more COVID. They're the ones who are going to keep workers and passengers safe, no matter whether it's the cruise ship industry, air travel, or on the border. And in terms of the Prime Minister reaching out and working with his counterpart, the President of the United States, I know they're having discussion about all kinds of things that world leaders are discussing, in terms of reopening borders. It's a lot easier to close them than to reopen them, but they are looking at what conditions and what measures, proof of vaccines and other things will be important to restore our border connections. Canadians, I understand, want at the right time, when it's safe to do so, to resume connections with their American family and friends, and then vice versa. Americans are keen to come to Canada and enjoy the experience that Canada is known for providing around tourism. So that's what we've been working on across government: the Tourism Ministry, IGRS, the Premier's Office, my staff in other ministries, but most importantly, the Provincial Health Officer, who's led the way on keeping British Columbia safe, and will continue to keep our province safe by having very thoughtful, scientifically based principles on what border reopening looks like.
Member.
Mr. Chair, the minister, again, earlier in his answer, indicated that they did communicate their view on technical stops. To whom was that communication given to or provided to?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I think it happened in the manner I just described. So certainly public health officials in our province, we're talking to public officials in other provinces, and the PHAC in Ottawa, Dr. Tam's organization, and IGRS would have been talking to their counterparts. My role, my counterpart in Ottawa, Minister Alghabra, was with whom I spoke, and also reiterated in correspondence that if there was a way to make technical stops feasible, that was something we could work with.
Member.
What would have been the date of the correspondence between the minister and his counterpart about technical stops?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So to the member, there was a series of conversations with Minister Algabra and my staff with Ministry of Transportation staff in Ottawa. I've mentioned other ministries, tourism, I mentioned IGRS. I can't account for those, except that I know that they were happening in the public health conversations. So recapping the discussions that I had with Minister Algabra, I wrote to him on May 21st. President Biden signed the temporary suspension of the PVSA bill into effect on May the 24th. Most recently, I've had a discussion with Minister Algabra last Friday, so 3 days ago. He and I are continuing to monitor the situation, and he's provided us additional opportunities to make views known. I've told him that the views that are most important on the border decision that the federal government will make and will announce to Canadians are really the views of Dr. Bonnie Henry. She's the one who, as I understand it, she talked about this today in her press conference, has reviewed the US CDC guidelines, is willing to work with industry on a set of safe sailing conditions out of BC. I am sure she's talking to her counterpart. She actually indicated that she has been, and there's an opportunity this week for the premiers. They're coming together, I believe, on Wednesday, and when the Prime Minister returns from the G7 on Thursday, he's going to have a discussion with Premier Horgan. It'll be wide-ranging, but certainly border reopening and the views of British Columbia will be part of that agenda.
Member.
Well, Mr. Chair, I do appreciate the Minister taking the time to confirm the dates of the correspondence that he would have had with his federal counterpart, and that's most helpful. Can I just ask on the piece of correspondence that the Minister indicated on May 21st, what was the purpose of that correspondence? Was it still talking about technical stops?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a number of things that were recapped and raised in the letter. One was to empathize and agree with essentially Senators Murkowski and Sullivan that the importance of the cruise ship industry to Alaska and to ourselves, and also letting the minister know, as I had on previous occasions, that within their suggestions in the May 11th letter to the Prime Minister that we could work with the conditional sailing certificate process. At that time it was, yes, so there's points in there about technical stops. But also that to let him know that we have a Safer Operations Working Group chaired by environmental health physicians. The BC Centre for Disease Control has membership from health authorities, from WorkSafe BC, and that they are constantly on high alert to work with the PHO to develop guidelines, safe guidelines for all sorts of industries, businesses, and social activities in our province, and we would similarly do so with the cruise ship industry. They've convened, they are ready to engage and give advice to the federal government.
Member for Vancouver Langara.
I appreciate, again, Mr. Chair, to the Minister for that summary of the contents of that letter. That's very helpful. The date that we were on, though, was February 24th, and when the Alaska Tourism Recovery Act was introduced in the House of Representatives, the Minister, of course, did take us to the end point when it was ultimately passed on May 24th with President Biden's signature signing it into law. So that was a 3-month period, almost to the exact point, three months from February 24th to May 24th, in which a critical period, certainly as we've been talking about here in this estimates process. We have the October 20th letter, the February 12th letter, and finally, in view of the lack of engagement by Canada and British Columbia with our Alaska neighbors, despite the 2 letters that were there, and despite the fact that technical stops was raised and the request that there be specific action taken, collaboration to find a solution. That letter, again on February 12th, talks about the 20,000 jobs in Alaska. You'd think that with 20,000 jobs at stake in Alaska, 20,000 jobs at stake here in British Columbia, the 2 jurisdictions would get together and work something out, regardless of all of the federal counterparts, to advocate to work something out so that there wasn't a structural change. And I appreciate again that right now, currently, it's a temporary nature, but it's a significant structural change. So if I walk back to February 24th, when that Alaska Tourism Recovery Act was introduced, we have further introductions here in terms of the activity by Senators Murkowski and Sullivan. Again, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, was there any communication with these Alaska representatives in view of the legislation that they were introducing into the House, which would stop and cease any port stops here in British Columbia?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. To the member, I am forgetting a little bit here, but February 24th, was that a letter to the ambassador? Certainly wasn't addressed to me. What I can say, and have said repeatedly during this wonderfully pleasant afternoon, is that I have been engaged. My colleagues have been engaged. The Minister of Tourism has been engaged. The Premier has been engaged. IGRS has been engaged in communicating with the decision makers in Ottawa who made the decision to close the port. They made the decision to extend that port closure to February 28th, 2022. And what we've been willing to do is present a BC perspective on that, our shared concern and commitment to a public health response on the issue of border reopenings. I have told, quite frankly, to the member opposite that in early to mid-February, not a lot of Canadians, and certainly not a lot of my time, was dedicated towards reopening the border. What I was concerned about was hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of Canadians getting sick, the battle against the virus getting worse, the vaccine rate being stuck at 2.3%, 0.1% for second doses. It was not a good situation in terms of where we are today. Today is a great day to hear Dr. Henry, the Premier, the Health Minister, the Tourism Minister, and the Jobs and Economic Recovery Minister announce to British Columbians, plan your lives. Summer is coming. Stage 2 is here today. We hope Stage 3 is here July 1st. We hope that substantive normalcy is there for everybody to enjoy September 7th. That's the public health response that we've been leading. The U.S. Center for Disease Control, I know the member wants to keep going back to February, but they did not have conditional sailing orders developed until May the 5th. The two senators wrote the Prime Minister on May the 11th. So we're at a, I think we were able to respond and I was certainly able to respond and make my views known to the Minister of Transportation around when the imposition on the port was made, around when the US CDC and the United States started giving some direction on what a sailing season might look like. But I think it's fair to say in February of 2021, most Canadians and a lot of people had thought that the chance to recover any of the cruise ship season in the year 2021 was unlikely. And of course, the cruise ship industry was just hammered at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if the member had the opportunity to watch the CBC documentary about the Diamond Princess and the transmission and quarantining and the helpless ability to deal with people in a congregate, dangerous setting when the virus was unknown. And of course, that was not the kinds of images that this sector wanted to beam around the world, but it was a compelling story about human beings trying to survive together with an unknown virus. And the cruise ship industry is wanting to work with our government, and we want to work with them. But most importantly, we want them to work with Dr. Henry and the CDC on a version of safe sailing conditions. This discussion has really only been possible in the last couple of months, or even right up into the last few weeks. The U.S. CDC published on May 5th. The RPHO has not had that long a time to review Dr. Fauci's organization's recommendations on that. There's a lot of things happening in American politics right now that may throw a curveball into the ability to seize an opportunity to potentially revise some plans that will give the industry certainty about a different restart date. Most notably, the governors of Florida and Texas, in all their wisdom, are suing Dr. Fauci and the CDC to claim that they have no jurisdiction on cruise ships, and that the very idea of having COVID safety guidelines is overreach by public health officials. Now, if that court challenge succeeds, it will be interesting because it will make the temporary bill that Senators Murkowski and Sullivan entered effectively moot, because that bill references a set of CDC sailing conditions that if the court strikes it down, of course, will not exist. And so we're alive to a lot of things that are maybe happening, but and things that are not in our control or in our jurisdiction are ones, there are some situations where we can give advice and hope to have influence, and that is really around the Prime Minister and his public health official, Dr. Tam, working with our public health officials to see whether there's an opportunity to bring additional clarity and a set of safe operating protocols to the cruise ship industry in BC sooner than they thought that they could get to way back in February when only 2% of Canadians were vaccinated. We're in a different place now. We've adapted to circumstances as they've changed throughout this pandemic. Sometimes they've changed for the worse. Sometimes they've changed for the better. Today was a good, hopeful day in terms of changes starting to happen for the better and for British Columbians to be able to enjoy each other's company. And with that, Honourable Chair, I move that the committee report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry and report progress on the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and ask leave to sit again.
Thank you, Minister. And we're doing that through the bells, so we're in need of a vote. So members, prepare that are virtual, prepare your voting cards. A vote is about to take place. And members, the question is that the committee rise, report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Transport and report Public Safety and Solicitor General, and report progress on the estimates of said ministry and seek leave to sit again. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say aye. Motion is carried. Thank you, members. This committee now stands adjourned.